a quiet school in the mountains, a smiling crowd, a golden retriever named Charlie wagging his tail on stage. But then he froze, his ears pinned back, his nose locked on a wall no one had looked at in decades. No one moved. Until he did. He lunged not in anger, but in purpose. And what Charlie uncovered beneath the gym wall wasn't just a piece of the past. It was a buried truth, one so powerful it would shake a whole town, reconnect shattered lives, and redeem an old man's soul. What happened next will make your heart ache and your spirit believe again. But before we begin, have you ever seen a dog do something that no one else noticed, but it changed everything? Drop your story in the comments. And if you believe animals sense more than we ever can, hit that subscribe button, because this story might just make you see dogs and the past in a whole new light. The autumn sun was slow to rise over Elk Creek, a small mountain town nestled between rolling pine ridges and the faded remnants of old mining trails. Mornings here were crisp, with a breath of frost still clinging to the tips of the golden grass lining the sidewalks. Elk Creek Middle School stood near the edge of town, its brick walls softened by ivy and time. That morning, clouds moved lazily across a pale blue sky, and the scent of wood smoke drifted faintly from nearby chimneys fall had settled in fully. Officer Emily Parker stepped out of her department-issued SUV, her boots crunching the gravel in the school parking lot. She was in her early 30s, tall and steady, with dark auburn hair tucked under a Navy patrol cap, and hazel eyes that carried both alertness and compassion. Years of working in rural outreach had taught her to read a room before speaking, and her calm demeanor often put both children and adults at ease. Her uniform was crisp, but what caught everyone's attention wasn't Emily. It was the dog that padded gently at her side. Charlie, a 7-year-old golden retriever, wore a blue vest with the words Therapy Canine Unit stitched in bold white thread. His coat was the color of sunlit wheat, thick and well-groomed, with tufts of silver just beginning to appear around his ears. His gait was smooth, his head held high, and his soft amber eyes seemed to scan everything with a quiet understanding. Charlie had served in hospitals, veteran homes, and even disaster relief sites. He wasn't trained to attack. He was trained to heal. As they approached the double doors of Elk Creek Middle Principal, Karen Willoughby greeted them with a smile. Karen was in her late 50s, petite and brisk, with short, steel-gray hair and wire-rimmed glasses perched perpetually at the tip of her nose. Her voice always held a note of urgency, as though every sentence had a time limit. Officer Parker, welcome. And this must be the famous Charlie? Emily smiled. That's him. He's excited to be here. Inside the gymnasium, folding chairs had been pushed aside to make space on the basketball court. Children buzzed with anticipation. Some sat cross-legged on the polished wood floor, others whispered from behind gym mats stacked like bunkers along the wall. Teachers stood near the entrance, sipping coffee from travel mugs and half watching the chatter. Among the crowd sat Ben Miller, a 6th grader who had chosen the farthest corner of the room. Ben was 11, lanky and pale, with unruly dark blonde hair that constantly fell into his hazel eyes. His shoulders were perpetually hunched, not from poor posture but from habit, an unconscious shrinking into himself. He wore a faded gray hoodie and scuffed sneakers and held tightly to the edge of his sleeve as he listened. Ben had been diagnosed with social anxiety 2 years earlier, and though academically bright, he struggled to speak in class or make eye contact. His mother, a single parent and night shift nurse, had done everything she could, but school remained a daily mountain for Ben. That day, however, was different. Emily walked Charlie to the center of the gym and gave a short, gentle introduction. This is Charlie. He's a therapy dog. He's not here to bark or bite or chase. He's here to show what calm looks like, even when the world gets loud. Charlie sat obediently, tail sweeping lightly across the polished floor as Emily began a demonstration of commands. Sit, stay, follow. The dog obeyed with fluid grace, never needing a raised voice or leash tug. Emily then explained how therapy dogs could help people feel safe, even in scary places like hospitals or after accidents. She avoided heavy terms. Instead, she spoke of comfort and trust. When she invited the students to approach Charlie in small groups, most rushed forward. Some stroked his soft ears, others posed for photos. But Ben stayed back, fingers knotted in his sleeve. Emily noticed. She knelt beside Charlie and whispered a command. Charlie rose and walked slowly, not toward the crowd but toward the corner where Ben sat. The room seemed to hush slightly. Charlie didn't rush. He stopped a few feet away and lay down, resting his head on his paws, watching the boy with quiet patience. Ben froze. Then, slowly, almost imperceptibly, he reached out a trembling hand. Charlie didn't move. He waited. A moment later, Ben scooted forward on his knees and touched Charlie's head. It was like someone flipped a switch. Ben smiled. It wasn't big or showy, but it was real. The first time anyone at the school had seen him smile in weeks. Charlie licked his palm gently. Ben let out a soft giggle. From across the room, Emily watched her lips parting slightly in awe. Principal Willoughby had one hand over her heart. Later, as the gym emptied and the students filed out, Ben lingered. Emily knelt to Charlie's level and ruffled his ears. "You did good, buddy." Ben stepped forward, then paused. Can he come back sometime?" Emily looked at him. He'd love that. Ben nodded, then turned and walked toward the door, his shoulders just a little straighter than before. Outside, the sky had grown bluer, the clouds thin and glowing. As Emily and Charlie walked back to their car, a breeze rustled the dry leaves scattered across the blacktop. Neither of them noticed the banner near the back wall of the gym, hanging slightly askew, covering a faint crack in the brick behind it. That would come later. For now, it was enough that one quiet boy had smiled. The afternoon sun filtered lazily through the high windows of the Elk Creek Middle School gym, casting soft golden light across the varnished floor and faint reflections on the polished bleachers. The post-event buzz was still in the air, children chatting about Charlie, laughter echoing off the walls, and a few parents arriving early to pick up their kids. Officer Emily Parker stood near the gym entrance, speaking quietly with Principal Willoughby, while Charlie sat calmly by her side. His head, slightly tilted ears, perked but relaxed. The scent of linoleum and faint sweat lingered in the gym, but something else was brewing just beneath the surface, like an old memory waiting to exhale. Charlie's body shifted. He wasn't looking at the crowd anymore. His ears turned forward, his muscles tensed, not in alarm, but in hyper-focus. Emily noticed it instantly, a flicker of instinct sharpening in her eyes. She stopped mid-sentence, following the dog's gaze. Charlie's eyes were locked on a spot near the far end of the gym. An old, slightly faded banner hung on the back wall above the emergency exit. It depicted a hand-painted eagle, the school's mascot, with the words "Elk Creek, proud past bright future" stitched beneath it. The banner sagged slightly at one corner, its edges frayed from time. Without warning, Charlie rose. He moved slowly at first, then with growing intent, tail stiff-nosed to the ground. His nails clicked softly against the floorboards as he approached the banner, then stopped just short of the wall and stared up. Emily called gently, "Charlie, heel." But the dog didn't budge. Instead, he let out a low, rumbling growl, one filled not with aggression, but certainty. Children stopped talking. A few teachers looked up confused. Charlie stepped closer, raised one paw, and began scratching at the base of the wall just beneath the hem of the banner. Not wildly, but rhythmically, methodically, as though he knew something lay just beyond the surface. Brick dust trickled to the floor. Emily strode toward him, concern tightening her jaw. "Charlie, what is it?" She knelt beside him, placing a hand on his back. He didn't flinch. His nose pressed against the wall again, and this time Emily caught it too. A faint smell, almost metallic, mixed with old dust and mildew. Her brow furrowed. "Is something wrong?" The voice came from behind her, deep and low. She turned and saw a man standing near the bleachers, half hidden by a cluster of students. He looked to be in his early 70s with a tall frame, slightly stooped from years of standing. His face was pale, the skin drawn tight along high cheekbones, and his gray hair was combed neatly back, though it had begun to thin. A thick corduroy blazer clung to his lean shoulders. His eyes, a soft green, dulled by age, weren't watching Charlie. They were fixed on the exact spot on the wall where the dog was scratching. Emily rose. "Sir, are you a staff member?" "I was," he replied quietly. "A long time ago." He stepped forward and extended a hand. "Harold Keene. I taught history here, from 1981 to 1999. Emily shook his hand. It was dry and cold. "Officer Parker, this is Charlie." Harold nodded slowly, then lowered his gaze back to the wall. "That banner wasn't always there," he said, almost to himself. "It was put up maybe 15 years ago. Before that, there was just bare brick." Emily narrowed her eyes. "Do you remember anything unusual about this section of the wall?" Harold hesitated, then licked his lips. "No, not exactly. Just that back in the late 80s during renovations, there were weeks when that side of the gym was off limits. No real explanation. They said it was to reinforce the wall. But the rumor was, well, kids said there was something hidden in there. I thought it was just talk." Charlie let out another soft whine, then sat back on his haunches, still staring up at the bricks. Emily gently pulled back a corner of the banner. There was nothing obvious, just old gray masonry, pocked and rough. But one brick lower than the rest bore a faint vertical scratch. Something too clean, too straight to be the work of time alone. Principal Willoughby approached the sharp click of her heels, breaking the silence. "Everything okay here?" Emily glanced over her shoulder. "Charlie's picked up something. I think it might be worth checking behind this section of the wall." Willoughby frowned. "That wall's solid. We had it inspected during the earthquake retrofits last year, but if he's trained for detection, then—" Harold interrupted, voice soft. "Sometimes what's behind a wall isn't structural." Willoughby gave him a puzzled glance, but Harold didn't elaborate. He looked tired, like something old and heavy had just stirred in his chest. "Let's keep the kids out for now," Emily said, "just as a precaution." "Agreed," Willoughby replied, then turned briskly toward the teachers. "Folks, let's wrap up. We'll resume classes after lunch." As the crowd dispersed, Charlie stayed behind Teo, still his gaze steady. Emily gave him a gentle pat. "Good boy," she whispered. "You found something, didn't you?" Harold lingered a moment longer, staring at the wall with eyes that seemed to see past it backward through time, perhaps. Then he turned and left without another word. Outside, clouds had begun to gather, the soft edges of autumn giving way to cooler grays. A light wind tugged at the flag on the pole beside the school's front entrance. Inside the gym, beneath an aging banner and a single scratch on an otherwise unremarkable wall, something waited to be remembered. The air inside the gym had grown still heavy in a way that didn't match the weather outside. Dust hung in narrow beams of light filtering through the windows, and even the usual groan of the old pipes above the ceiling seemed to have gone silent. Officer Emily Parker stood with her sleeves rolled to her elbows, a crowbar in one hand, her brow furrowed in concentration. Beside her, Principal Willoughby had her arms crossed, lips drawn thin. The students had long been escorted to their classrooms. It was just the two of them now. Well, three, counting the one who had brought them to this moment. Charlie. The golden retriever sat a few feet back from the wall, his golden coat shimmering in the pale light. His body was rigid, his eyes locked on the section of brick now exposed behind the pulled-back banner. He hadn't barked since earlier, but his stance said everything alert, tense, expectant. "All right," Emily said softly, adjusting her grip. She wedged the crowbar beneath the loosened brick, her arms straining with controlled force. With a quiet crack and a burst of crumbling mortar, the first brick gave way. A second followed, then a third. The opening was no larger than a briefcase, revealing a small dark recess inside the wall. Emily leaned closer. "Smell that?" Willoughby nodded. "Like rust. And something else." Emily sniffed again. "Metal, mold, maybe old paper. But there's a sharpness to it, almost like oil or machine grease." At the back of the cavity sat a box dull gray, about the size of a lunch pail, its corners rounded with age. It looked hand-welded, sealed tight, and a strange latch on the front hinted at a locking mechanism not made for casual use. Emily reached in, carefully fingers brushing the cool metal. The moment her hand touched it, Charlie let out a low growl, not aggressive, but clear. She froze. "You feel that too, huh?" Willoughby stepped back instinctively. "Is it dangerous?" Emily pulled the box out, slowly, setting it on a folded tarp she'd laid nearby. Charlie moved forward immediately and planted himself in front of it, his posture rigid. He didn't growl again, but his nose pressed against the air near the latch, and he let out a soft whimper. Emily crouched beside him. "Easy, buddy." "It's all right." Charlie stayed still but did not move aside. His eyes remained fixed on the box, as if something inside it carried a story he could almost hear. Emily reached for her radio. "Dispatch, this is Officer Parker at Elk Creek Middle School. I need assistance. Possible secure container, unknown contents. Requesting unit with clearance for possible hazardous material or ordnance assessment." There was a pause, then static. Then a calm voice replied, "Copy that. Officer. Team en route. ETA 20 minutes. Willoughby knelt on the opposite side, squinting at the latch. "What do you think is inside? I don't know," Emily murmured. "But Charlie's never reacted like this to an object before, not unless it's something connected to stress or trauma." Willoughby frowned. "You mean emotionally?" "Yes. It's part of why therapy dogs can respond to certain scenes. They sense it. Echoes." Suddenly, a voice broke the quiet. "I remember that box." They turned. Harold Keene stood near the gym's entrance again, his tall frame backlit by the hallway lights. He looked as though he hadn't moved since he'd walked out, like he'd been waiting just out of sight, too restless to stay away. Emily stood. "Mr. Keene, this area's secured right now." Harold stepped forward, his shoes scuffing softly against the floor. "I understand. But I swear I've seen that exact kind of box before. In 1987, after a strange delivery came in during summer break. They said it was for utility rewiring. I was told to stay clear of the gym. When I returned in September, the banner had gone up. I didn't think much of it until now." Emily raised a hand. "I appreciate that, sir, but I can't let anyone approach this until it's cleared by the incoming unit." Harold's jaw tightened. "At least, let me take a look from here, please." She hesitated. His tone wasn't pushy, more desperate. There was a look in his eyes, distant yet urgent, as though a part of him had remained trapped in the wall with that box all these years. "All right," she said finally, "but no closer than here." Harold nodded and approached to within a few feet, stopping just beside Charlie. His gaze dropped to the box. He inhaled sharply. "I knew it," he whispered. "That latch, "It's military. You served?" Emily asked. Harold shook his head. "No, but my older brother did. He was in signals intelligence. Died overseas. When we packed up his things, there was a box like this. He told me before he left that if I ever saw one like it again, not to open it unless I was ready to learn something I couldn't unlearn." Charlie shifted slightly, tail brushing against Emily's boot. Emily remained silent, studying Harold's face. "Was your brother connected to this place, somehow?" she asked. Harold didn't answer. Instead, he turned away, walked 3 steps back, and rubbed a trembling hand across his mouth. "I don't know. I just know this isn't a joke." The air seemed to press heavier in the gym now, as though memory itself had substance. Emily stood beside Charlie and whispered, "We'll wait." Outside, the wind had picked up. Clouds slid across the mountains, drawing longer shadows across the schoolyard. In the quiet space between discovery and explanation, the only sound was the low, steady breathing of a golden retriever who had sensed something no one else could. The tactical response van from county headquarters rolled into Elk Creek's lot, just as dusk brushed the tops of the pines with amber light. The gymnasium lights had been turned low, the windows now glowing faintly from the inside like a lantern on the verge of revealing something buried in time. Officer Emily Parker stood near the box arms, folded, keeping an eye on Charlie, who remained steadfast, his body stretched out protectively before the sealed tin container. Dust still hung lightly in the air, the scent of rust and mildew growing more potent the longer the box sat open to the world. 2 field techs emerged from the van, each in matching navy blue jackets marked with the insignia of the Cold County Hazardous Evidence Division. The older of the 2 was Rick Halverson, a broad-shouldered man in his late 40s with grizzled hair and wire-rimmed glasses that never quite stayed on the bridge of his nose. He walked with the confident fatigue of someone who'd spent half his life entering rooms no one else wanted to. The second was Marla Denton, mid-30s, wiry, and quick, her blonde hair cropped short beneath a cap, her manner sharp and observant. She said little, but her glances took in everything. Emily briefed them quickly, pointing out Charlie's reaction, the state of the wall, and Harold's statements. "We haven't opened it. Just removed the bricks and brought it out. The dog hasn't left its side since." Rick knelt near the box flashlight in hand. "Well, he's got good instincts. This weld job's old but intentional, not something a janitor cobbled together." Marla pulled out a small sensor wand and passed it around the perimeter. "No active signatures, no heat or magnetics. My guess, it's storage. Possibly paper-based, maybe film." Charlie huffed softly, tail-tapping once against the floor as if to say yes, exactly that. Rick cracked the latch. It groaned as it gave way, revealing a sealed inner tray lined with waxed fabric. Carefully, he lifted the tray and exposed the contents, a bundle of rolled papers tied with twine, a handheld reel-to-reel recorder caked in dust, and most striking of all, a torn green folder, corners frayed, a faded title stamped in military stencil, Camp Oriole, 1962, confidential. Everyone went still. Emily took a step closer. Camp Oriole. Rick looked up. "You've heard of it?" Emily shook her head. "No, that's what worries me." Marla gently lifted the folder with gloved hands and opened it. Inside were yellowed pages, partially water-stained with neatly typed memos and aerial sketches. There was also a black-and-white photo clipped to one sheet showing a fenced compound, not unlike a small military training site nestled within thick pine forest. There were men in uniform, but no insignias. A sign, barely visible in the background, read, "Elk Creek Youth Academy." Emily's breath caught. That's this place." Rick studied the map that accompanied it. "It's a match. Look at the old gym layout. That exit corridor matches the current foundation." Marla whistled. "So, This school was built on top of a covert training facility. Rick nodded grimly. Not just any. Look, communications gear encryption logs. These weren't teachers, they were operatives. At that moment, a quiet noise stirred at the far end of the gym. Ben Miller stood by the doors, partially hidden behind the trophy case, his hoodie sleeves clutched in both hands. His eyes were wide, a strange mixture of fear and awe. Charlie noticed him first rising and giving a small tail wag. Emily turned sharply. "Ben, what are you doing here? You were supposed to be with your class." I forgot my jacket," he mumbled. "I came back to get it. But then I heard—" Emily softened. "You shouldn't have stayed." Ben stepped closer, hesitating. "What's Camp Oriole?" Rick and Marla exchanged glances. Emily crouched beside him. "It's something we didn't know was part of this town's past. But we're going to find out more." Ben didn't ask anything else. He just nodded slowly, as if adding this to the secret catalog of things he kept locked behind his quiet eyes. That night, Ben sat in the living room of a modest, single-story home on Elm Hollow Drive, an old quilt draped over his knees, the flicker of a muted television washing his freckled face in blue light. Across from him sat Edith Graves, his grandmother, a woman in her early 70s with long silver hair pulled back in a braid and fingers curled around a cup of chamomile tea. Edith had been the school librarian at Elk Creek from 1970 to 1992. She moved slowly now, her joints stiff from years of shelving and reshelving, but her mind remained sharp. Ben hesitated. "Grandma, does the name Camp Oriole mean anything to you?" The cup stopped mid-air. Her face changed. The softness drained away, replaced by a stillness that felt older than the house itself. She set the cup down. "Where did you hear that at school?" A box behind a wall. Officer Emily found a file. Edith was quiet for a long moment. Then she reached under the coffee table and pulled out a worn photo album with leather ties. She opened to a page near the back and handed Ben a faded black and white photo. It showed a man in uniform, slim, handsome, early 30s, standing near a wire fence. The sign behind him read, "Restricted Access, Oriole Facility." On the back, written in neat cursive, Henry Graves, 1962. "Your grandfather," she said quietly. "He was stationed here. I thought it was an airfield. That's what he told me. But then one day, he didn't come home. No letters, no phone calls. They said it was classified, that he vanished during a training drill. I never believed that, and I never heard Oriole again. Until now." Ben stared at the photo, then at his grandmother, who looked suddenly older than he had ever seen her. "I think Charlie found something important," he whispered. Edith nodded, eyes shining with tears. "Yes, sweet boy, and maybe now, after all this time, we'll learn what really happened." Morning at Elk Creek brought with it the scent of wet pine and chilled earth. A low fog hugged the edges of the schoolyard, curling like breath against the bricks of the old gymnasium. Inside, the mood had shifted from curiosity to silent urgency. Yellow tape now cordoned off the far end of the gym where bricks had been removed. The box and its contents had been cataloged and secured, but what lingered was something more visceral, a sense of something still waiting just out of reach. Officer Emily Parker stood beside a long table covered in copies of the documents from the green folder. Most were still being reviewed at County HQ, but one piece had drawn immediate attention, a blueprint of the original building plans dated 1961. Faded lines revealed structural details beneath the gym that didn't match modern renovations. One hallway stood out, marked in red pencil with a note in the margin, "Secondary Access West Foundation Staff Only." Next to Emily, Rick Halvorson scratched the back of his neck. "That's not on the current floor plan. If this thing's real, it runs behind the storage room. Could be sealed, but it's worth a look. Charlie, sitting at Emily's feet, shifted his weight and gave a quiet, alert huff. Emily glanced down. "You ready to lead the way again, partner?" It took nearly an hour to clear access. The custodial record showed no mention of the storage room in question, being anything other than a supply closet. But after moving shelves and prying back a false wall of plywood, they found it an iron door with a rotary latch, rusted but intact, hidden behind decades of paint and neglect. "Jesus," Rick muttered. "It's like something out of a fallout shelter." Emily turned the latch slowly and the door groaned as it opened, revealing a narrow tunnel stretching into darkness. The air that spilled out was cold and stale, carrying the scent of concrete dust and something far older like sealed memories and forgotten voices. The group moved in carefully, flashlights cutting beams through the damp air. Emily walked ahead with Charlie at her side, his tail down his head, low and searching. The tunnel was barely tall enough to walk upright, with walls lined in chipped paint and exposed conduit. At intervals, faded markings labeled with stencils appeared: Subnode A, Storage, 3, Exit 2, North. After nearly 50 feet, the passage widened into a chamber no larger than a small classroom. Broken chairs and old filing cabinets lay scattered across the floor. Against the back wall stood a bank of rusted switchboards, their dials long frozen wires drooping like dead vines. Above it all, half concealed by layers of dust, was a tarnished metal sign bolted to the wall: "Com Room. Echo Node 3. Rick exhaled. It's real. A real Cold War comm station. Right under a middle school. Emily stepped forward, shining her light along the switchboards. Worn labels still clung to some of the panels: antenna relay, audio lineout, encryption keypad. A faint hum echoed from a corner, just air through old vents, or so it seemed. Charlie's attention turned. He padded to a low wooden beam near the edge of the room. Nose close to the floor, he sniffed, then pawed gently at the beam. Emily followed and knelt beside him. There, faint and uneven, carved into the wood with something sharp and crude, were 5 simple words: RT, forgive me. She ran a gloved finger across the letters. Someone left this before the place was sealed. Rick crouched beside her. Initials. Emily nodded slowly. Could be Ronald T. I remember the principal mentioned a file, Ronald Turner. Expelled in the 60s. No reason ever listed. Rick looked thoughtful. Someone trying to bury something deeper than wire and code. Later that afternoon, Ben sat in the back corner of the school library, where old yearbooks and forgotten textbooks lived in uneven stacks. Across from him, the shelves dipped slightly evidence of years of settling. Mrs. Carter, the librarian, was away on lunch break, so the quiet space belonged to him alone. Ben, as usual, said nothing to anyone. But his hands moved with purpose. He reached for the oldest stack spine-cracked yearbooks from the early 60s, their pages yellow and worn soft like cloth. He flipped through them, scanning for names, eyes catching on Ronald T. every time it appeared. Then he found it not in a yearbook, but in a small cloth-bound notebook tucked between the shelves. A journal, old and unclaimed. The cover was scratched and stained with ink. Inside, the writing was tight-slanted and anxious. Page after page spoke of fear, secrecy, and isolation. On the final entry, a line stood out. They said I had to choose, say nothing, or be erased. I couldn't do both. If anyone finds this, tell my brother I'm sorry. The signature R.T. Ben held the book in his lap, his breath shallow. He didn't understand all of it, but he knew one thing: someone had been trying to speak for a very long time. He slipped the journal into his backpack and looked out the library window toward the gym. Charlie sat outside the gym's side door with Emily staring up at the clouds, tail resting on the concrete, as if still guarding the past. Rain began to fall over Elk Creek just past noon, gentle and steady tapping against the window panes of the school, like fingers asking to be let in. Inside the gymnasium, the smell of damp earth mixed with dust and old paint, a strange brew of nostalgia and unease. A team from the Federal Historical Intelligence Division had arrived early that morning. Their black SUVs bore no markings beyond the faint outline of government plates, and their agents carried themselves with the same silence that had settled into the gym since the discovery of the Echo Node. Leading the team was Agent Celia Hart, a woman in her early 50s with high cheekbones, a severe jawline, and steel-gray hair pinned neatly into a bun. Her suit was dark, pressed, but unembellished, and her voice carried the crispness of someone used to cutting through fog, whether literal or political. She had an uncanny ability to ask questions that felt rhetorical but weren't, and she rarely blinked. By her side moved Agent Darnell Rios, late 30s, clean-shaven medium build, with olive-toned skin and expressive brows that shifted constantly, hinting at a deeper well of empathy than his partner allowed herself to show. Where Hart was direct, Rios observed. He kept a quiet notebook filled with half-legible shorthand, and his eyes rarely left the people he questioned. The agents had brought with them a restoration unit, delicate tools, and a compact reel-to-reel playback console designed for delicate analog recordings. On a steel table in the gym's back corner, one of the recovered reels from the hidden box now turned slowly, a faint crackle rising from the speaker as the voices of the past returned to life. Echo node, verify, drop location, negative compromised, recommend terminate. No, listen, we have a leak. He knows he's not. Who he says he's been passing data back through Oriole, name, coded. Alpha 6 double agent, repeat. Double agent. The static swelled, then broke. Agent Hart turned to Emily, who stood beside the table, arms crossed, her expression tight. Charlie lay behind her head, resting on his paws, but his ears flicked with every new burst of sound from the machine. That was from March 1963, Hart said. 2 weeks before the Oriole facility was officially decommissioned. We're running decryption on the codenames now. Emily nodded slowly. So, someone was leaking information. Someone within the operation, Rios added. Likely someone local. These facilities always relied on civilians for plausible cover, school, staff maintenance crews, local liaisons. That's how they stayed invisible. And the agent who left the message, Hart hesitated. No signature. But the voice was male, possibly late 20s. Emily glanced at the documents on the nearby board. Any connection to Harold Keene? Before Hart could answer, Charlie stirred. He rose slowly and padded across the gym, his nose low to the floor. He paused at the far edge of the bleachers, sniffed, and then began nudging something beneath the tile. Emily followed, crouching beside him. With a little pressure, the loose tile lifted, revealing a small rusted compartment no bigger than a shoebox. Inside lay dust and a single object, a delicate brass hairclip twisted into a floral design, dulled by time, but unmistakably feminine. Emily picked it up with gloved hands, turning it gently. A single letter was engraved on the underside, E. Charlie whined softly. Emily looked across the gym to where Harold Keene stood watching from the edge, eyes hollow. His corduroy blazer looked too heavy for his thin frame, and the light from the overhead lamps cast deep lines across his face. She approached him, holding the hairclip in her palm. This belonged to her, she asked. Harold stared at the clip. For a moment his breath caught. Then he nodded. Evelyn. My wife. She disappeared in March of '63. They said it was an accident, an electrical fire near the boiler. But there was never a report, never a funeral. I always knew it wasn't the truth. Emily's voice was gentle. You were working with them, weren't you? Harold exhaled slowly. I was a contact, a voice on the radio. I thought I was helping, transferring harmless intel, timetables, logistics. They told me it was for national security. And Evelyn Emily asked. She found a message, he said, voice shaking. A memo I'd left in my coat pocket. She confronted me, said she didn't want to be part of lies. The next day she was gone. They told me not to ask. Emily looked over at Hart, who was listening silently. Hart gave a slight nod. We matched the initials from the file. Hart said, Alpha 6, the double agent. His real name appears to have been Ronald Turner. Emily turned sharply. The expelled student. He wasn't a student, Rios clarified. He was planted here at age 16 with forged documents. Trained in Cuba, fluent in Russian. He played his part too well until someone found out, likely Evelyn. And when she did, well, Emily looked down at the hair clip in her hand. So this entire operation was built on silence. Harold's eyes filled with moisture. I stayed silent for 50 years. Charlie stepped closer, resting his head against Harold's knee. The old man laid a trembling hand on the dog's head and whispered, I'm sorry. As the agents began packing up their gear, Emily glanced over at the school's front windows. Outside, the rain had stopped, but puddles dotted the concrete and the fog had not lifted. She saw Ben across the lot waiting under the overhang beside the library. He waved nervous but curious. Emily waved back. The past was surfacing now. Slowly, painfully, but not alone. And sometimes it took a golden retriever with quiet eyes to lead everyone there. The assembly hall of Elk Creek Middle School had never held such silence. Rows of folding chairs lined the polished floor filled with parents, teachers, and students all gathered not for a talent show or academic award ceremony but for something else entirely. A town reckoning. A return of the buried. The banners of school spirit still hung from the rafters, but their cheerful slogans seemed pale in the shadow of what had been unearthed. Principal Karen Willoughby stood at the podium, her voice measured but tight with emotion. What began as a school visit from Officer Emily Parker and her companion, Charlie, has in the past few weeks become something much larger. It has opened doors, some literal, some metaphorical. Today we gathered to acknowledge not only a piece of our history but the lives that have been shaped and in some cases broken by it. In the front row sat Harold Keene, shoulders slightly hunched, blazer neatly pressed. His hair was combed, his hands folded tightly in his lap. He looked smaller than before, as if confession had shrunk him, but also somehow made him clearer, like an old photograph restored. Next to him sat Emily and Charlie. The golden retriever lay still, his amber eyes alert but calm. He wore a fresh collar navy blue leather with silver etching along the band. On the small plate near the buckle, new text gleamed in the light memory keeper. The audience quieted further as a figure walked shyly up the side aisle toward the stage, Ben Miller, his dark hoodie too long in the sleeves hands fidgeting inside the kangaroo pocket. His hazel eyes scanned the room nervously, and for a moment he hesitated, turning slightly as if he might go back. Then he caught Charlie's gaze and the dog's tail gave one gentle thump. Ben turned and stepped up to the mic. "My name is Ben," he began, voice shaking but loud enough. "I'm in 6th grade. I don't usually talk in front of people, and I used to hate being called on in class. But something happened, and I think it's worth sharing." Somewhere in the audience, a mother reached over and gently squeezed her daughter's hand. I met Charlie a few weeks ago when Officer Emily came to our school. I didn't want to go near him at first, but he didn't rush me. He just sat there waiting. That was the first time I didn't feel scared in front of other people. Ben's voice steadied as he continued. Since then, I've learned that Charlie also helped find something hidden in our school. Not just an old wall or a box, but memories, things that got locked away because they were painful or dangerous. But memories don't stay buried forever. He paused and reached into his pocket. From it, he pulled a small gift box. Walking across the stage, he knelt beside Charlie and opened the box to reveal the collar. Carefully, he clipped it around the dog's neck. I had this made for him. Because Charlie didn't just find history, he kept it and shared it with us. The room filled with a hush so deep it echoed louder than applause. Later, outside under the maple trees, now tinged with early autumn fire, Harold walked with Emily along the path that led to the gym's rear wall, the same wall that once hid the iron box, the sealed tunnel, the chamber with its rusted comboards, and the final carved words from another lifetime. I used to walk this route every day, Harold said quietly, back when I taught here. And after Evelyn vanished, I never could come near this wall again, even after retirement. I'd drive blocks out of the way just to avoid seeing it. Emily walked beside him, her hands tucked in her jacket, her gaze soft. I was 29. Harold continued when the CIA recruited me. They said I'd just be relaying non-critical intel drop locations' names that had already been cleared for rotation. I was ideal, they said. Quiet, observant. A man who knew how to keep his head down. And Emily asked. She was smarter than all of us, Harold said with a smile that barely reached his eyes. She read one of the coded memos I left on the table. Said she'd report it if I didn't. I told my contact. The next day there was a fire in the boiler room. Or so they claimed. He stopped walking. She always left me a note in chalk here, he added, nodding toward the brickwork. Every day when I came to class. Her last one just said, "Still proud of you. E." I never saw it again. Never wanted to. They stood quietly, rain-softened, leaves drifting at their feet. I thought I was protecting the country, Harold whispered. But I was just a man too scared to fight for the one person who mattered most. Charlie stepped closer and nuzzled Harold's leg. The old man bent slightly and rested his hand atop the dog's head. "You're the first one who listened," he said softly, his voice catching. "Thank you." Emily remained quiet, letting the silence carry what needed no reply. That evening, as dusk folded across Elk Creek and the last of the press vans disappeared down the mountain road, Principal Willoughby lit a single candle in the window of her office, a tradition her predecessor once followed when a student or staff member passed. But this time, it wasn't for mourning. It was for memory, for Evelyn, for forgiveness, and for the boy who finally found the courage to speak. The last day of school dawned with the kind of soft golden light that made even the worn bricks of Elk Creek Middle seem noble. Wildflowers had begun blooming at the edges of the parking lot, and the maple trees lining the front walkway rustled gently in a June breeze. Banners hung along the fence read, "Thank you, Charlie and Guardian of Elk Creek," their hand-painted letters crooked and charming. The whole town had shown up, families, veterans, students past and present. And at the center of it all sat a golden retriever, fur gleaming like morning sunlight, calm and still as a monument carved from kindness. Charlie. His navy collar, newly polished, bore the plate engraved by Ben just weeks before Memory Keeper, but today he wore something else as well. A handmade scarf, forest green, with golden stitching looped loosely around his neck. At its edge was a tiny emblem, the shape of a strong old oak, the forgotten symbol of Camp Oriole resurrected not as a weapon of secrecy, but as a badge of remembrance. Ben had sewn it himself. He now sat beside Charlie, dressed in a navy blazer that didn't quite fit at the shoulders and khakis, a little too long in the leg. His hair had been combed neatly for the occasion, but one lock had already fallen back into his eyes. He kept glancing sideways at Charlie as if needing quiet reassurance. As always, Charlie gave it with a single tap of his tail. A podium had been set up in front of the school entrance. Behind it stood Representative Lydia Monroe, a woman in her early 60s with a commanding posture, silver-streaked hair swept into a bun, and a voice that carried with it both dignity and the resonance of personal grief. She had lost a brother in the Cold War, one whose name had appeared in redacted form among the documents uncovered from the school's hidden chamber. Today, she said, holding the mic steady, we do not honor war. We do not honor espionage nor the shadows that once blanketed this place. We honor truth and the unlikely path that led us to it. We honor a dog and a boy. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Thanks to Charlie, she continued, this school has been officially recognized as a National Historic Site by the Department of the Interior. Not because of its architecture, not because of its age, but because of the human story etched into its bones. She stepped aside as Officer Emily Parker came forward, a crisp blue uniform pressed to perfection, her hair tucked in a tidy French braid. In her hand was a velvet box. She smiled only slightly as she knelt beside Charlie, then opened the box to reveal a silver medallion inscribed with the Department of Defense seal and the words Guardian of Elk Creek, for service beyond command. "Charlie," she said softly, clipping it to his collar, "you were never trained for this, but you knew what mattered. You protected more than children. You protected what was left of the truth." Applause echoed through the schoolyard. From a shaded seat beneath one of the maples, Harold Keene looked on his cane resting against the bench, his face composed but moist at the corners. His blazer bore a pin with the Oriole insignia not as a symbol of pride, but of closure. Since the files had been declassified, Harold had written several articles, assisted in building the school's new digital archive, and at Emily's insistence recorded an oral history now stored at the Elk Creek Public Library. People had stopped crossing the street to avoid him. A few even brought him coffee. And then there was Ben. A week before Principal Willoughby, her stern demeanor softened by the recent months, had asked him to serve as the first student ambassador of memory, a newly created role meant to connect students to Elk Creek's history. Ben had nodded quietly, but that night he'd brought out the green scarf stitched until midnight and whispered the words he now repeated beneath his breath. "You protected us, Charlie. Now we protect your memory." Later that afternoon, after the crowds had dispersed and the banners were being taken down, Ben and Charlie sat alone on the steps of the gymnasium. A few students darted across the field behind them, tossing crumpled notebooks like victory confetti. The echo of summer had begun. Ben scratched behind Charlie's ear and leaned close. "I used to think memories were just things that made you feel sad. Stuff you didn't want to remember. But you showed me there's something else. They're anchors. Stories that keep people from disappearing." Charlie let out a small, contented breath, then lowered his head onto Ben's shoes, eyes half closed, basking in the warmth of early summer and the peace that comes with a story finally told. At the edge of the field, a plaque had been installed that morning beside a newly planted white oak. It read, "In memory of Evelyn Keene, and all voices silenced by fear. Let this place be a keeper of stories, not secrets. Elk Creek Middle School, Camp Oriole, 1962 to forever." As the sun began to set, its light pooled gently across the gym wall, the same wall where it had all started, and no one noticed that the shadows no longer felt so heavy. Sometimes the most extraordinary miracles don't come in a blaze of glory, but in the quiet presence of a golden-furred guardian who simply refuses to look away. Charlie wasn't sent into Elk Creek to chase fame or uncover secrets. He was there to comfort, to listen, to wait. But God often uses the gentle to reveal the hidden, the broken to mend the forgotten. This story reminds us that truth has a way of rising sometimes through the innocence of a child, sometimes through the loyalty of a dog, and sometimes through the hands of those who carry regret, but still choose redemption. Like Charlie, we are all called to guard the memories that matter, to protect the quiet places where truth still whispers. In your own life, perhaps you've experienced a moment where something small, something quiet became the turning point. That was no accident. That was grace. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs to believe in miracles again. Comment Amen if you believe that every forgotten voice deserves to be heard. Subscribe for more true stories of hope, healing, and the bond between animals and the people they rescue in return. And may God bless you and your loved ones wherever your journey takes you next.
Rain hammered the cracked pavement in relentless sheets, pooling in shallow depressions that mirrored the gray sky above. A gust of wind sent an empty soda can clattering down the deserted street, its metallic rattle echoing against shuttered storefronts. That was when Mara saw it, a small, unmoving shape pressed against the side of an overflowing dumpster, its fur matted and glistening with cold water. At first she thought it was just another heap of discarded rags, the kind the rain made heavy and shapeless. But then the heap lifted its head, eyes catching the faint glow of the street lamp, and the truth tightened her chest. The dog, if it could still be called that, was little more than skin stretched over bone, a patchwork of wet fur clinging to a trembling frame. Its ribs shifted visibly beneath the surface each time it breathed. It didn't run when she approached, didn't bark or growl. Instead, it sat perfectly still, as though waiting for something only it understood. Beneath it, forming a barrier between its fragile body and the icy pavement, was an old jacket once black, now faded to a washed-out charcoal, the fabric stiff from dampness. Mara slowed, her breath clouding in the air. It wasn't the jacket alone that made her stop, it was the way the dog was sitting on it, protective, almost possessive, as if the scrap of clothing was more than just warmth. The collar of the jacket was folded under, and there was a bulge in one side pocket, the fabric taut with something inside. She crouched, the rain seeping through the knees of her jeans, and spoke softly. "Hey, where'd you get that, boy?" The dog's ears twitched, but it didn't move. Its eyes, dark, wary, but not entirely without hope, followed her hand as she inched it toward the pocket. Mara hesitated, feeling the strange wrongness of touching something so clearly important to this creature. She half expected it to snap at her, but it only let out a low, almost inaudible whimper. The zipper was half broken, teeth missing near the seam, but she managed to ease it open just enough. Her fingers brushed something dry, impossibly dry, given the storm tucked deep inside. Paper. She pulled it out carefully, her stomach tightening as she realized it was a folded letter. The creases softened from handling, the edges worn. She glanced at the dog again, and for a moment it looked like it wanted to stop her, its body shifting ever so slightly forward. She opened the letter with her back shielding it from the rain. The ink had bled in places, but the words were still clear enough to read. The first line made her forget the cold entirely. "If you are reading this, I am gone." The sentence hung in the air like a held breath, the rest of the letter trembling in her hand as the wind tried to tear it away. She looked down at the dog, whose gaze never wavered. Somehow, she knew this was no random stray. This was a messenger of something unfinished, something left behind. The street around them seemed to shrink, the steady roar of rain fading into the background hum of her own heartbeat. The letter, the jacket, the silent dog, they formed a story she couldn't yet see, but one she knew she was already part of, and somewhere deep in that soaked paper was the reason why this animal had not left its post. Even as the storm clawed at the world around it, she folded the letter again, her fingers numb but steady. "All right," she murmured, almost to herself. "Let's get you out of here." But as she reached for the dog, its head lifted toward the alley beyond, ears pricked as if it had just remembered something, or someone. The sound that followed, faint, distant, and unmistakably human, made the hair rise on the back of her neck. It was a voice, calling not her name but something else. And the dog, for the first time, stood up. The letter felt heavier now in her pocket. Whatever story it held, it wasn't finished. And neither, she suspected, was the night. Mara's pulse quickened as the sound echoed faintly between the dripping brick walls. It wasn't loud, more like a broken fragment of speech, caught and carried by the wind, but the dog reacted as if it had been waiting for it all along. Its paws shifted on the wet pavement, nails scraping against the slick concrete, and its head tilted toward the dark mouth of the alley. The rain ran in rivulets from its matted fur, but its eyes were suddenly alive with something sharper than fear. Recognition. She rose slowly, clutching the letter in her pocket as though the thin paper might anchor her in this moment. "Who's there?" she called, her voice wavering between caution and urgency. The only reply was the soft drip of rainwater from a rusted fire escape above. She glanced at the dog. It had taken a single step toward the alley, then looked back at her, as if asking permission. Mara hesitated, but the thought of turning away, of leaving this strange fragment of a story unresolved, was unbearable. She nodded. "All right, lead the way." The dog moved with surprising steadiness, weaving between trash bins and abandoned crates, its small frame slipping through the narrow corridor with ease. Mara followed, her boots splashing through puddles that reflected warped glimmers of the city's distant neon. The air here was colder, the storms howled muffled by high walls, and the smell of damp cardboard and something metallic clung to every breath. Halfway down, she saw a small wooden crate wedged against the wall, partially covered by a torn tarp. The dog stopped in front of it, not barking, not whining, just standing still, its gaze fixed. Mara stepped closer, heart thudding. She pulled back the tarp, expecting more discarded junk. Instead, she found a faded photograph lying on top of a crumpled wool blanket. It was warped at the edges from moisture, but the image was still visible. A young man, maybe mid-20s, kneeling beside the same dog, both of them bathed in late afternoon light. Behind them was a stretch of grassy parkland that looked nothing like the gray decay of this neighborhood. She felt the air shift before she heard the footsteps. Someone was behind her. Mara turned sharply, her breath catching. A man stood at the mouth of the alley, not the man from the photograph. This one was older, mid-40s perhaps, with a deep hood shadowing his face and rainwater streaming from the edges. He didn't move closer, just stood there, watching. "That's not your dog," he said finally, his voice low but carrying easily over the distance. Mara swallowed hard, instinctively placing a hand on the dog's back. "And you know whose it is?" The man's jaw worked as if he were weighing whether to answer. Then he stepped forward, the hood slipping back slightly to reveal tired eyes and a jagged scar along his cheekbone. "I know who it was," he said, "and I know why it's still here." Her fingers tightened on the letter in her pocket. "Then you know what this is," she said, pulling it out just far enough for him to see the edge. His eyes flicked toward it, and something unreadable passed across his face. Not surprise, not exactly, but something close to recognition. "You shouldn't have that," he said. "It wasn't meant for you." The dog, sensing the shift in energy, moved between them, its thin frame bristling in the dim light. Mara felt the tension in its body, the silent thread binding it to whatever this man represented. "Then who was it meant for?" she asked, her voice sharper now. The man took another step closer. Rainwater dripped from his sleeve, landing in steady beats against the puddle at his feet. "The one who left him here," he said, "and she's not coming back." The words landed with the weight of finality, but there was no satisfaction in his tone, only a kind of hollow inevitability. Mara's mind raced. The letter's first line echoed again in her head. "If you are reading this, I am gone." "Then tell me," she said, "what happened to her?" He hesitated, glancing toward the far end of the alley where the streetlight's glow bled faintly into the dark. "It's not my story to tell," he said finally. "But if you want answers, you'd better decide fast. There are others looking, and they won't care about the dog." A gust of wind swept through, rattling the loose top against the crate. Mara looked down at the photograph again, then at the trembling animal beside her. The rain had begun to ease, but the air was still thick with the taste of coming trouble when she looked back up. The man was already retreating, his steps quick and soundless over the wet pavement. He didn't look back, disappearing into the shadows as if he'd never been there. Mara knelt, her knees soaking again in the cold puddles, and pressed her palm to the dog's side. "We're not done," she whispered. The dog blinked slowly, then let out a sigh that seemed far too heavy for its small body, as she gathered the photograph and folded it carefully into her coat pocket alongside the letter. A sharp noise cracked through the alley. Not thunder, not rain. It was the metallic slam of a car door, close enough to make her flinch. Voices followed, muffled but urgent, moving fast. The dog's ears shot up, and for the first time since she'd found it, it pulled at her coat, urging her back toward the street. Mara rose, adrenaline surging, and let it lead her out into the open air again. She didn't know who those voices belonged to, or why they carried that tone of urgency, but the weight of the letter and the photograph pressed against her like a silent warning. Somewhere in the tangle of wet streets and dim light was the rest of the story, and now, she suspected, people who would rather she never heard it. The rain had slowed to a cold drizzle, but the air felt heavier than ever, and through it all the dog kept looking over its shoulder, as if it knew they were already being followed. The alley was darker than Mara expected, the kind of darkness that seemed to drink in the dim streetlight behind her. Puddles rippled under the thin glow, disturbed only by the rain and the quiet, deliberate steps of the dog as it moved ahead. It didn't hesitate, didn't glance back, as though it knew this path by memory. The letter in her pocket felt like a weight pulling at her with every step, each fold of the paper hiding a truth she wasn't sure she wanted to uncover. She could still hear that voice in the distance, faint and uneven, but closer now. Her shoes splashed through the cold water. As she followed, she could taste the damp air, metallic with rust, thick with the scent of wet cardboard and something faintly sweet, almost like rotting fruit. The walls of the alley were cluttered with old posters peeling from the brick, their colors drained by years of weather. Somewhere overhead, a gutter overflowed, spilling a steady stream that hit the ground with a sound like dull applause. The dog stopped just short of it, turning its head toward a narrow side passage Mara might have missed if not for its movement. She stepped closer, her pulse quickening. The voice came again, not calling for help exactly, but speaking in low, broken phrases. She couldn't make out the words. The dog slipped into the passage, its paws silent on the wet concrete. Mara followed, ducking beneath a sagging metal pipe. The narrow space opened into a small courtyard hemmed in by walls that seemed to lean inward, trapping the rain inside. In the far corner, beneath a slanted sheet of corrugated metal propped against the wall, someone was sitting. It was a man, thin, pale, and drenched. His head was bowed, his hair plastered against his skull, and his hands were wrapped around something hidden under his coat. The dog padded straight to him, curling against his side as if completing a circle left. Open too long. The man didn't look up right away. Mara stood frozen, unsure whether to speak or retreat, the cold running through her like another pulse when he did raise his head. His eyes were startling, dark, sunken, and rimmed with a raw exhaustion that made him seem older than he probably was. "You found him," he said, his voice rough, the words barely lifting above the rain. Mara blinked, the confusion breaking through her caution. "I know. He found me." The man's gaze shifted to her pocket, as if he could see through the fabric to the letter inside. "You read it." It wasn't a question. She hesitated. Only the first line. Something passed over his face, a shadow of both relief and pain. "Then you know enough." He shifted under the metal sheet, pulling his coat tighter. The dog stayed pressed against him, its tail giving one slow thump as if to acknowledge her presence, but no more. The silence stretched, filled only by the patter of rain on metal and the steady drip into a nearby bucket. Mara wanted to ask a dozen questions: who he was, what had happened, why the dog had been left out there, but there was something brittle about him, as though the wrong word might cause him to crack completely. Instead, she said, "He was guarding your jacket." The man closed his eyes for a moment, his shoulders drawing inward. "It's not mine anymore." Her pulse skipped at the phrasing. "Then whose is it?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he reached into his coat, pulling out a small bundle wrapped in plastic. He set it gently on the ground between them. "You can take it," he said. "That's what the letter was for." The bundle was light when she picked it up, too light for how deliberate he'd been in keeping it close. Through the cloudy plastic she could see the edges of more paper, and something else, a small metal glint. She didn't open it. Not yet. Before she could speak, the man shifted his gaze to the dog. "Go with her," he murmured. The dog looked up at him, ears pricking, then back at Mara. It didn't move. Her chest tightened. "I'm not here to take him away from you." His expression changed. Not anger, not exactly sorrow, but a kind of resignation that came from already knowing how the ending would go. "He'll follow you," he said. "You'll see. And when he does, don't bring him back." Mara stepped back, unsettled by the quiet certainty in his voice. She wanted to argue, to demand the rest of the story, but the man lowered his head again, shutting himself off. The conversation was over. The dog rose slowly, as though torn between two worlds, then padded toward her, its paws whispering over the wet concrete. She left the courtyard without looking back, the bundle in her hands and the dog at her side. The rain felt colder now, the streets emptier. She could still feel his eyes on her even after the walls of the alley hid him from view. Each step home carried the weight of unanswered questions, the edges of the letter's first line echoing in her head. It wasn't until she reached the mouth of her street, the dim porch lights breaking through the darkness, that she realized the bundle had grown warm in her hands. Not from the rain, not from her own body heat, but from something else entirely, something alive with meaning. She stopped, glancing at the dog. Its gaze met hers steadily, as if waiting for her to decide whether she really wanted to know what she'd been given. And in that moment, Mara understood that whatever she found inside would change everything. The alley was darker than Mara expected, the kind of darkness that seemed to drink in the dim streetlight behind her. Puddles rippled under the thin glow, disturbed only by the rain and the quiet, deliberate steps of the dog as it moved ahead. It didn't hesitate, didn't glance back, as though it knew this path by memory. The letter in her pocket felt like a weight pulling at her with every step, each fold of the paper hiding a truth she wasn't sure she wanted to uncover. She could still hear that voice in the distance, faint and uneven, but closer now. Her shoes splashed through the cold water. As she followed, she could taste the damp air, metallic with rust, thick with the scent of wet cardboard and something faintly sweet, almost like rotting fruit. The walls of the alley were cluttered with old posters peeling from the brick, their colors drained by years of weather. Somewhere overhead, a gutter overflowed, spilling a steady stream that hit the ground with a sound like dull applause. The dog stopped just short of it, turning its head toward a narrow side passage Mara might have missed if not for its movement. She stepped closer, her pulse quickening. The voice came again, not calling for help exactly, but speaking in low, broken phrases. She couldn't make out the words. The dog slipped into the passage, its paws silent on the wet concrete. Mara followed, ducking beneath a sagging metal pipe. The narrow space opened into a small courtyard hemmed in by walls that seemed to lean inward, trapping the rain inside. In the far corner, beneath a slanted sheet of corrugated metal propped against the wall, someone was sitting. That it was a man, thin, pale, and drenched. His head was bowed, his hair plastered against his skull, and his hands were wrapped around something hidden under his coat. The dog padded straight to him, curling against his side as if completing a circle left. Open to long. The man didn't look up right away. Mara stood frozen, unsure whether to speak or retreat, the cold running through her like another pulse. When he did raise his head, his eyes were startling dark, sunken, and rimmed with a raw exhaustion that made him seem older than he probably was. "You found him," he said, his voice rough, the words barely lifting above the rain. Mara blinked, the confusion breaking through her caution. "You know, he found me." The man's gaze shifted to her pocket, as if he could see through the fabric to the letter inside. "You read it." It wasn't a question. She hesitated. Only the first line. Something passed over his face, a shadow of both relief and pain. "Then you know enough." He shifted under the metal sheet, pulling his coat tighter. The dog stayed pressed against him, its tail giving one slow thump as if to acknowledge her presence, but no more. The silence stretched, filled only by the patter of rain on metal and the steady drip into a nearby bucket. Mara wanted to ask a dozen questions: who he was, what had happened, why the dog had been left out there, but there was something brittle about him, as though the wrong word might cause him to crack completely. Instead, she said, "He was guarding your jacket." The man closed his eyes for a moment, his shoulders drawing inward. "It's not mine anymore." Her pulse skipped at the phrasing. "Then whose is it?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he reached into his coat, pulling out a small bundle wrapped in plastic. He set it gently on the ground between them. "You can take it," he said. "That's what the letter was for." The bundle was light when she picked it up, too light for how deliberate he'd been in keeping it close. Through the cloudy plastic she could see the edges of more paper, and something else, a small metal glint. She didn't open it, not yet. Before she could speak, the man shifted his gaze to the dog. "Go with her," he murmured. The dog looked up at him, ears pricking, then back at Mara. It didn't move. Her chest tightened. "I'm not here to take him away from you." His expression changed, not anger, not exactly sorrow, but a kind of resignation that came from already knowing how the ending would go. "He'll follow you," he said. "You'll see. And when he does, don't bring him back." Mara stepped back, unsettled by the quiet certainty in his voice. She wanted to argue, to demand the rest of the story, but the man lowered his head, again, shutting himself off. The conversation was over. The dog rose slowly, as though torn between two worlds, then padded toward her, its paws whispering over the wet concrete. She left the courtyard without looking back, the bundle in her hands, and the dog at her side. The rain felt colder now, the streets emptier. She could still feel his eyes on her even after the walls of the alley hid him from view. Each step home carried the weight of unanswered questions, the edges of the letter's first line echoing in her head. It wasn't until she reached the mouth of her street, the dim porch lights breaking through the darkness, that she realized the bundle had grown warm in her hands. Not from the rain, not from her own body heat, but from something else entirely, something alive with meaning. She stopped, glancing at the dog. Its gaze met hers steadily, as if waiting for her to decide whether she really wanted to know what she'd been given. And in that moment, Mara understood that whatever she found inside, it would change everything. The courtyard felt smaller now, its walls pressing inward as the rain softened into a mist. Mara stood near the doorway where the man had vanished, the dog at her side, its body warm against her leg. Despite the damp, the approaching footsteps had faded, leaving behind only the low hum of the lone bulb overhead and the rhythmic drip, wad of water from a rusted gutter. She reached into her pocket, pulling out the letter one final time. Her fingers hesitated before unfolding it, the paper fragile and reluctant to open, as if it knew what it carried should not be disturbed. The rest of the words were brief, written in a hand that trembled toward the end. "If you find her, know she is all I could not save. I left her with what was mine because it was the only thing I had left to give. Please, don't let her wait for me any longer." Mara read it twice, each line sinking deeper, until the meaning settled like a weight she couldn't put down. The man's warning, the way the dog had stayed by that jacket in the cold, it all came into focus. This was not a story about abandonment. It was a story about someone holding on until the very last moment, and leaving a piece of themselves behind for what they loved most. She knelt and touched the dog's head gently, feeling the steady breath beneath her palm. "You're not waiting anymore," she whispered. The dog blinked slowly, leaning into her touch, and for the first time since she'd seen it in the rain, its body seemed to ease. When she stood, she slipped the letter back into her coat, not as a mystery to solve but as something to keep safe. Together, they walked toward the mouth of the alley, the pale morning light just beginning to bleed into the gray. Mara didn't look back. Some stories end not with answers, but with the quiet decision to carry what remains forward. The dog stayed close, step for step, as they left the courtyard behind, and with it the last shadow of the storm.